They say the infected people took down the world in a matter of weeks. That's not true. The world was already broken. The outbreak just made it honest. I didn't lose anyone when it all fell apart. No tearful goodbyes, no last calls or final messages. When the virus hit New York and spilled into Jersey, I didn't go looking for family. I didn't even check on the people who used to call me their responsibility. Truth is, I barely remembered what their voices sounded like. The first time I watched someone get torn apart on the street, I didn't flinch, just stood there, quietly counting how long it took. 16 seconds before the screaming stopped. That told me more about the new world than any news broadcast ever did. But I wasn't always like this. There was a time when people tried to fix me. My name is Aaron Pierce. Before the world ended, I was labeled treatable, a success case. Someone who could be folded back into society with enough pills, enough talking, enough pretend progress. I played along. Therapy sessions, behavioral checks, the whole dance. Cedar Heights in Newark became my second home. They said I showed signs of improvement. I nodded in all the right places. They never saw the truth. Maybe no one did, until the rules vanished and everything burned. Cedar Heights claimed to have turned me around, claimed I had made enough progress to re-enter the world. I acted like a model patient, took pills on schedule, recited the key phrases in group therapy, pretended I felt guilty for things I'd done. In reality, I didn't feel anything. Not remorse, not anger, not sadness. Just a curious disconnection from the people around me. If anything, I learned how to blend in. I got discharged. They recommended continued therapy and medication, but I was free. I returned to a tiny rental in downtown Newark, courtesy of a distant uncle who wanted me off his back. Spent the first few weeks trying to figure out what normal life looked like. I found a job at a big box electronics store in Secaucus, working graveyard shift. I stood behind a locked glass case of expensive laptops and cameras, half listening to the hum of overhead fluorescent lights, sometimes slipping a few items into a secret stash in the supply closet. No one noticed. Or if they did, they never called me on it. Then the news started reporting odd outbreaks. Officials on TV said it was some kind of severe flu. The first sign that it was more than that came when the so-called flu victims started attacking hospital staff. It started in New York City, crossing over from the boroughs into northern New Jersey at an alarming speed. The local stations showed shaky phone footage of paramedics being knocked to the ground. There were rumors of people, recently declared deceased, standing up and staggering forward. The general public soon gave them nicknames: eaters, strays, risen, the changed. Each group of survivors seemed to have its own term. In those early days, I still had a dim curiosity about my mother's status, but it wasn't strong enough to push me into action. She was living somewhere in Staten Island, last I heard. I watched from my window as the chaos spilled across the Hudson River. The highways flooded with abandoned cars. Emergency sirens blared in the distance at all hours. The store in Secaucus shut down after staff and customers got attacked in the parking lot. National Guard trucks barricaded major intersections along New Jersey Turnpike, but the barricades didn't hold for long. No official evacuation plan reached me. Actually, no official plan reached anyone in my building, as far as I know. I gathered supplies and prepared to wait. I wasn't sure for how long. A month, a year. I had no illusions that help was coming. One night, the lights cut out for good. The next morning, the water pressure trickled down to nothing. I collected what I could: canned food, a few knives from the communal kitchen, those stolen electronics from work. The electronics, of course, were useless without power, so I left them behind. The knives, though, came in handy. My building had 5 floors and an old rooftop access that no one used. I lugged everything up to the roof, pried open the locked door. Out there, I found a small utility shack that housed some maintenance equipment, half a dozen spare tiles, a broken shovel, that kind of stuff. I set down my supplies and took a moment to observe the city. Smoke rose in plumes from multiple directions, Below, ragged figures shambled through deserted streets. They moved with a strange, stiff repetition. Whenever they spotted something living, they'd lurch forward in a surge of horrifying momentum. That first time I saw them up close, I felt almost nothing. I didn't even flinch. I just watched from the rooftop as they descended on an unlucky neighbor across the street. I couldn't hear his screams over the general clamor of sirens and chaos, but I saw him waving his arms, trying to fight back. My only response was to back away from the ledge. Something about that day confirmed I wasn't like other people. A normal person might have panicked or tried to help. Me? I simply decided I had to stay out of their path. From the rooftop, I lasted nearly 10 days without much trouble. Nobody else came up there, and the Risen, my personal term for them, didn't notice me. Every so often, a rescue helicopter thumped overhead. It never stopped for me. Maybe it saw me, maybe it didn't. I felt no urge to wave, no urge to call out. Eventually, my supplies ran low. I planned a route out of Newark, wanting a quieter place. Through rumor and scraps of news, I heard that the National Guard had set up quarantine zones further south, around Fort Dix or McGuire Air Force Base. Maybe that was true. By then, local law enforcement was practically gone. The few neighbors who survived huddled inside their apartments. I saw flickers of candlelight through curtained windows at night. Sometimes, I heard them rummaging for scraps. Occasionally, they called out for help. I never answered. Not once. I made my move on a grey morning, slipping down the fire escape at dawn. My plan was to get to the railroad tracks that led south, follow them until I spotted a supply opportunity, then continue beyond the main infected zones. I had a small backpack with me, canned goods, bottled water, a multi-tool. I also carried a pair of decent knives, one on my belt, one in a shoulder sheath. Firearms were scarce in my neighborhood, and I lacked any personal connections who could get me one. I set off through the streets. Cars sat abandoned in every direction, but I seldom saw living humans. Occasionally I passed a corpse. If it moved, if it got up, it was one of them. If it stayed down, maybe it was gone for good. I didn't take chances. I would hurry by, not lingering. I'd push open half-broken doors, rummage for supplies. Some folks, in their final days, had left everything behind. I found a couple of freeze-dried camping meals in a basement, stuffed them into my backpack. At the outskirts of the city, near Kearney, I spotted a small group of living people, 4 or 5 maybe, quietly picking through the wreck of a grocery store. I approached without a sound. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk. Maybe I could glean some information or rummage supplies from them. They wore mismatched gear, hiking boots, makeshift armor. One carried a wooden baseball bat with nails hammered through the end. Another brandished a long pipe. They didn't look like kindly souls, but I was curious how they would react to me, so I let them see me. They spun, raised weapons, called out for me to keep my distance. I did. They demanded to know what I wanted. I told them calmly I was just passing through. One of them, an older woman, waved me over. They were new to the city, traveling from a failed quarantine zone in Elizabeth. She asked about the major highways. I told her the truth. New Jersey Turnpike was jammed, collapsed barricades all over. She insisted that was where they needed to go anyway. She asked if I had a car. I shrugged. She offered me a deal. If I helped them find a vehicle with enough gas to get to the next quarantine zone, they'd share some rations with me and let me ride along. Maybe I should have said yes. I might have made some kind of ally that day. But the idea of joining them felt suffocating. They didn't trust me, and I didn't trust them. Besides, I could see the cracks in their group dynamic. The younger guy in the back glared at me like I was a threat. The older woman only pretended to be kind. Her eyes darted around, sizing me up. They were already on edge. I parted ways with them. No arguments, no farewell. Just turned and walked away. I remember hearing one of them whisper about whether or not to follow me, but none did. That night, I found a vacant motel off a back road near Bayonne. It had been stripped of everything of value: blankets, furniture, even the doorknobs in some rooms. I barricaded one corner room with a dead vending machine and waited out the darkness. All that time I was listening to the wind outside, scanning for any sign of the risen. They were thick in the cities, but I guessed they roamed the suburbs too. I was right. Once I heard a rattling noise in the hallway, something bumping into walls, stumbling aimlessly from one door to the next. I waited with my knife, and eventually the noise drifted away. In the morning, I left for the railroad tracks, crossing the overgrown yard behind the motel. That was when I first saw the crawling variant, the ones people nicknamed creepers. They were half rotted from the waist down, so they dragged themselves along the ground with surprising tenacity. I spotted one creeping across the gravel near the tracks, pulling itself by its elbows, leaving a dark trail behind. Its eyes rolled in my direction. I gripped my knife. A few months before, I would have run or at least hesitated. This time I moved forward. I jammed the knife at its head, holding the top of its skull to keep it still. Afterward, it stopped moving. I was careful to avoid direct contact with fluid. News reports said the infection spread through bites or contact with bodily fluid. For reasons I can't articulate, that thing didn't bother me at all. In fact, I felt more at ease. Maybe it was because I saw them not as people anymore, but as predators. Or maybe I had always been numb to violence. Either way, I decided then and there that if anything stood in my path, living or not, I'd remove it. Life was a lot simpler that way. I followed the freight tracks down through Linden and Rahway, passing rusted factories and empty shipping yards. I had no illusions of rescue. The army, the police, FEMA, they were all scattered or overwhelmed. The train depots were mostly abandoned. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of more groups of survivors, gleaning what they could from derelict warehouses. We'd eye each other from a distance, rarely speaking. Too many bad encounters made everyone wary. By late summer, word on the street was that most major cities along the East Coast had lost control. Boston was gone. Philadelphia was crumbling. Even the outskirts of Washington, D.C. were compromised. There were rumors of safe zones in the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, places where the population was thinner and the risen had fewer hosts to spread through. I set my sights on heading west. If I found other people along the way, that was fine, so long as they didn't bother me. I spent my days scavenging. My nights I'd sleep high up in water towers or perched on rooftops. The risen, there were so many terms, but the risen stuck in my mind, wandered aimlessly in large packs now, often clumped together, as if drawn by some primal instinct. Some survivors insisted they reacted to noise. Others claimed it was motion or scent. I never had the patience to study them in detail, but I noticed that loud sounds brought them running, or shambling or stumbling from all directions. Quiet was my ally. In mid-September, I encountered a group of 4 in an industrial park near Metro Park Station. They were rummaging through pallets of shrink-wrapped canned food. I watched from behind a stack of empty boxes. They spoke in hushed tones, rummaging quickly as though they expected trouble. Eventually, they spotted me. One man, probably in his late 30s, raised a rifle to his shoulder. It was an AR-15, well maintained. He told me to back off. I could sense his tension by the way he kept repositioning his feet. I recognized that feeling of constant readiness. The others in his group held crowbars or knives. They all wore backpacks stuffed with cans. I said, "I just want some supplies." He gestured with the muzzle of the rifle. "You alone?" I nodded. They didn't relax. The woman in the group muttered something about being careful. Too many marauders around. That word, marauders, was starting to get thrown around a lot. Folks who preyed on other survivors, using the apocalypse as an excuse to unleash their worst impulses. Not so different from me, I guess, though I never gave myself a label. In a gesture of good faith, the group leader set down 2 cans of tomato sauce and 1 can of beans about 10 feet away on the concrete floor. Then they backed off, maintaining a line of sight with that rifle. I took the cans, nodded, and quietly walked away. In my mind, I saw no reason to escalate. They were organized and armed. Fighting them risked everything. Besides, I had a sense I'd find more supplies down the line. That night, I settled in a deserted shipping container yard. I climbed atop a stack of containers to get away from the ground-level roamers. It was a quiet night. I opened the cans with my multi-tool, eating the beans cold, sipping from a jug of water I'd found. At times, the moans of the risen drifted through the labyrinth of steel containers. Strange shapes moved below, silhouettes in the faint moonlight. I made sure not to drop anything or draw attention. I found an idle sense of calm out there. The old world had been busy, full of expectations I didn't want to meet. This new world was simpler. People revealed their true colors. Those who wished to cling to civilized behavior tried forming small communes or safe houses. Others embraced brutality. And me? I didn't feel a pull to either side. I only cared about one thing: continuing. If that meant stepping over the living and the dead, I would. By early October, the nights turned cold. Electricity was long gone, except for the sporadic hum of a generator in the distance. I decided to cross into Pennsylvania. My path took me over the Delaware River near Trenton. Bridges were clogged with vehicles and swarms of the infected. I opted for an abandoned rail bridge covered in graffiti. It was risky, but I moved fast, weaving through broken sections of track. On the far side, I set foot in Pennsylvania near Morrisville. I spent the next few weeks creeping southwest, loosely aiming for the rumor of a quarantine zone near Harrisburg. Along the way, I cut through smaller towns. Many were shells of their former selves, barricaded windows, deserted main streets. The risen populated every alley. One morning, I heard a commotion in an empty parking lot outside a shut-down strip mall. I crept behind a dumpster and watched two groups of survivors in a standoff. One group had rifles, the other only knives. Tensions escalated quickly. Within minutes, gunfire erupted. The noise attracted a wave of risen, and both groups scattered. I watched from behind the dumpster, unaffected. I started to realize something. The biggest threat wasn't the infected. At least they were predictable. The living, though, were desperate, cunning, and anxious. They lied, stole, attacked without warning. Some carried secrets worse than any rotting shell. More than once I slipped away from a group that caught me sneaking by, only to see them turn on each other minutes later. That first year was a crash course in how fragile the old moral codes really were. By mid-November, I'd spent nearly 6 months navigating this landscape. People in therapy used to say I had trouble empathizing, that I lacked the capacity to form healthy bonds. Now, ironically, it was an asset. I didn't hesitate to leave people behind or take what I needed. I also didn't kill for no reason, only when it served a purpose. That might sound monstrous, but it was simple math. Eventually, while scavenging near Lancaster, I fell in with a pair of survivors who didn't appear too threatening. Ben, a lean college student from Franklin and Marshall, who'd lost his campus dorm to the outbreak, and Shay, a former EMT who carried an empty medical kit. We all ended up in the same grocery store at the same time, rummaging for cans. Initially, they were nervous around me, but we reached an uneasy agreement to travel together for a bit. Ben was quiet. Shay was the more talkative one. She'd share bits of medical knowledge or ask if I had any injuries she could patch up. The trouble was, her supplies were basically gone. We spent 4 days together. At night, we hid in office buildings or abandoned houses, taking turns staying on watch. We shared resources, which made sense in the moment, safety in numbers. I found them easy to manipulate. They were desperate to trust someone, and I was calm enough to pass as a friend. We didn't encounter many risen in that stretch of rural Pennsylvania, but we did run into another group. That group was larger, 8 men and women, heavily armed. They claimed they were collecting supplies for a bigger settlement. They demanded we hand over our backpacks. Shay tried to reason with them, but it didn't go well. Sensing the tension, I slipped away behind a crumbling wall. A few moments later, I heard muffled shouting. Ben and Shay's voices soared in panic, gunshots. When I peeked around, the armed group was already rummaging through our belongings. Ben and Shay were on the ground. I'm not sure if they were alive or not. They weren't moving. The group was too busy looting to notice me. I considered stepping in, but it would have been useless. 8 armed folks against me, wielding only knives. So I stayed hidden, letting them take whatever they wanted. Once they left, I emerged and approached my traveling companions. Neither one spoke or moved. Shay's medical kit was cast aside, trampled. I decided not to linger. I salvaged whatever was left of my belongings and moved on. There was no sense in mourning people I barely knew. Around early December of that first year, I stumbled onto a ragtag group near York, Pennsylvania. They called themselves the Sentries. Some wore mismatched camouflage, others had makeshift weapons. Their leader introduced himself as Malcolm. He was tall, muscular, with a grin that never reached his eyes. Despite their patchwork appearance, they seemed well organized. They had a couple of vehicles, a battered pickup truck and a dirt bike, and they talked about heading west to find a rumored big settlement. I found them around an old distribution center, the windows boarded up. Risen occasionally wandered by, but the sentries had set traps, a series of simple pitfalls and barbed wire. It was effective. They invited me to join them for a meal, canned beef stew heated over a camp stove. Malcolm asked lots of questions. Where was I from? Did I have any specialized skills? He asked if I was willing to fight to protect their camp. I answered vaguely, giving enough detail to appear useful, but not so much that they'd see me as a threat. They made a show of letting me stay the night. It was the first time in a while I found myself sitting around a campfire with others, hearing low chatter about everything from old sports rivalries to the best places to scavenge. But something about the group unsettled me. They laughed too easily at the suffering of others, boasted about how they had disposed of travelers who got in their way. I saw no moral boundary in these people. In some twisted sense, they reminded me of the folks from the therapy sessions who used to talk about marauder personality types. The difference here was that they were proud of it. They tried to recruit me. I nodded along but didn't give a firm answer. That night, I feigned sleep in a corner of the warehouse they occupied. I heard whispers from Malcolm and a few others discussing me. They wondered if I could be trusted. They decided to test me in the morning, maybe send me on a mission to see if I'd commit violence for them. I wasn't particularly opposed to violence, but I didn't like being manipulated. So I slipped out before dawn, quietly stepping over the sleeping forms. If they caught me sneaking away, there would be no second chances. Just as I was nearing an exit, a sentry noticed me. He was dozing against a stack of crates, but my movement woke him. I saw him reach for a sidearm. Without pausing, I lunged and silenced him. Quick, clean. Then I vanished into the night. I left the camp behind, not looking back. That was my first kill of a living human being in this new world, or at least the first time I'd done it so directly. I didn't feel shaken. It felt like a practical choice. He would have shot me. So I took care of him first. End of story. January arrived with a fierce chill. Snow dusted the highways, making tracks easier to see. Most of the Risen slowed in cold weather. They'd freeze in place, sometimes locked into bizarre poses. But when the sun warmed them, they'd move again. Winter gave me a break from the massive hordes I'd seen in the fall. I traveled further west, aiming for Pittsburgh. There were rumors that the city was a battleground between multiple survivor factions. I hoped to skirt around it, but I was curious to see if any safe zones had actually been established. On the outskirts near Monroeville, I caught word of a group calling themselves the Ravens. They had a radio tower somewhere in the city, broadcasting messages about cooperation and refuge. It was about midday when I stumbled onto their actual setup, a small walled community built around an old hospital parking lot. High chain link fences topped with barbed wire, guard posts overlooking the perimeter. A woman in a heavy coat approached me, flanked by 2 armed guards. She introduced herself as Naomi, one of the leaders. She asked the usual questions. Was I infected? Was I armed? Did I have any useful skills? She also asked if I was willing to contribute labor. I told her I'd do my share if it meant a secure place to stay. That was half true. I wasn't particularly interested in community, but I was cold and tired, and if they had food and shelter, that was better than wandering alone for a while. Inside, I saw about 24 survivors going about daily tasks, reinforcing the walls, sorting through salvaged medical supplies from the hospital, growing what looked like winter greens in makeshift planters. The hospital building behind them was sealed off. Naomi explained that the interior was still infested with the Risen, specifically a variant they called shadows. These shadows preferred dark, enclosed areas. They came out at night, hunting anything that made noise. The Ravens had made some attempts to clear them, but it was too risky, so they stuck to the parking lot and barricaded the lower floors. Over the next week, I observed the daily routine. They had a decent system for rationing food and water, a rotation for guard duty. Everyone contributed, whether it was cooking, sewing, repairing fences, or patrolling. The tension among them was noticeable, though. There were often small arguments about who was doing more work, who got the best portion of rations. Naomi tried to keep order, but I could tell she was exhausted by the burdens of leadership. I played along, doing menial tasks like hauling water or patching holes in the fence. They gave me a bunk in a small shed near the guard tower. I felt a strange sense of being an outsider. Some of them tried to be friendly, told me their stories, losing loved ones, escaping infected highways, the heartbreak of watching entire city blocks burn. I listened, nodded, but never revealed much about myself. At some point, a few of them asked about my family. I shrugged, saying I never got along with my parents and had no idea where they were now. A young man named Joel said he was planning to lead a small expedition further into Pittsburgh to scavenge food. He asked if I'd go along. 4 of us set out at dawn, crossing the snowy streets. The city was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the caw of actual ravens picking over trash. We found a warehouse that once stored canned goods, but it looked picked clean. Then we tried an old supermarket, pushing through toppled shelves and scattered debris. We managed to collect a few items, mostly stale crackers, powdered milk, and some canned fruit. But we lingered too long. A wave of Risen, apparently lurking in the back rooms, shambled toward us. The group panicked. Joel got cornered behind a cash register. Another man, Vince, yelled for me to help. I was near the exit at the time. I saw Joel fumbling, pinned by a snapping figure in a tattered jacket. He looked at me, desperation in his eyes. Vince rushed forward but was outnumbered. I just stood there. Maybe I could have helped. Maybe not. But I didn't see the benefit in risking my life for them, so I turned and left. The last thing I heard was Vince shouting my name as the Risen closed in. I moved quickly through the aisles, stepping over broken displays and shattered glass. By the time I reached the street, they were all behind me. Joel, Vince, the other 2 from our party, and at least half a dozen infected. A gunshot rang out, echoing off the empty buildings. I didn't look back. I sprinted until I was sure I'd lost them. I arrived at the Ravens' compound alone. Naomi demanded to know what happened. I lied, said we got ambushed by a large horde, that Joel and the others were separated, that I barely escaped with my life. She squinted at me, suspicious, but she had no proof. Some of the others glared, maybe sensing there was more to the story. Still, they were short on manpower, so they allowed me to stay. Tensions grew over the next few days. Whispers circulated that I might have left them behind on purpose. People started avoiding me. I sensed that it was only a matter of time before someone confronted me. Then, a few nights later, the shadows in the hospital building broke through a compromised entrance on the 2nd floor. They poured into the parking lot, drawn by some ruckus I never fully understood. Maybe a malfunctioning generator, or a scream from a nightmare. Alarms rang, survivors scattered. Naomi tried to rally people, but the shadows were fast and relentless. They struck in the darkness, each one bearing decayed skin and a silent, determined gait, different from the usual slow risen. The community tried to fight them off with makeshift torches and shotguns, but it was chaos. I slipped away in the confusion. I grabbed a few supplies, hopped the chain link fence at a spot the shadows hadn't reached yet, and vanished into the snowy streets. Over my shoulder, I saw muzzle flashes and flickering lights, but I never heard a rescue call. I assumed the ravens were done. By the time spring returned, I'd developed a pattern of solitary travel. I spent months roaming through parts of Ohio, crossing farmland and small towns. I discovered that the roads were less congested in rural areas, though there were roving bands of infected even there. Occasionally, I found pockets of survivors eking out an existence on old farmland, raising a few animals, trying to create a semblance of normal life. I never stayed. Their illusions of safety annoyed me. I also crossed paths with more unscrupulous types, groups that enslaved weaker survivors or demanded tribute. Some called them the war bands. They had no fixed base, just roamed with vehicles, imposing themselves on settlements. If you cooperated, maybe you got to live. If not, they'd burn your barns, break your fences, and attract risen to your location through noise and chaos. I avoided them whenever possible. Around late summer, I ended up near the outskirts of Cincinnati. This was a war zone in every sense. Some sections were completely overrun, infected wandering the highways for miles. Others were controlled by militaristic factions with stolen National Guard vehicles. I kept my head low, scrounging supplies from deserted neighborhoods, always mindful of the possibility of being caught between two warring human groups. It was during this time that I met a small band of 4 who seemed just as detached from morality as I was. Kevin, a wiry mechanic who carried an old hunting rifle. Raina, a self-proclaimed ex-security guard with a short temper. Marcus, a quiet giant of a man who rarely spoke. And Gwen, a sharp-eyed woman who acted as their unofficial leader. I'm not sure how we managed to stick together, but for about 2 months we traveled as a unit. They weren't squeamish about eliminating threats, whether those threats were infected or living. Once, we came across a half-collapsed building where a small family, parents and 2 kids, were hiding. Gwen suggested we help ourselves to any supplies they might have. I stood there, expressionless, as Kevin forced his way in. The father tried to resist, brandishing a small hatchet. Raina shot him in the leg. The family handed over their supplies in a panic: canned goods, a water filtration pump, warm clothing. Gwen insisted we leave them alive, though it was only because we didn't want to waste ammunition or attract attention. We left them in that ruined building. Their lives were worth nothing to us. I can't say I felt remorse. I remember the father's expression, the mother's sobbing, the kids trembling behind a broken couch. It was just another moment where I realized how easily people's moral convictions melted under pressure. Gwen's group had no illusions about compassion. We took what we needed. If the family survived afterward, that was their problem. As fall approached, tensions grew within our small band. Gwen and Raina wanted to join a larger raider faction to ensure a steady flow of supplies and greater protection. Kevin wasn't sure, and Marcus didn't care. I listened from the sidelines, not truly invested. Then, one evening, Gwen tried to strong-arm me into agreeing with her. She tried to accuse me of cowardice, saying I never fully participated in their raids. She said if I didn't pull my weight, maybe I wasn't a good fit. That night, I quietly observed as they made plans to connect with a raider group called the Iron Wardens. The next morning, I woke early to find Gwen and Raina rummaging through my backpack, presumably searching for anything valuable. They looked up, feigning innocence. Something snapped in me. If they wanted to betray me, I'd move first. Later that day, we traveled along a side road, the infected visible in small clusters to the north. I guided the group toward a large parking structure, claiming I'd seen a cache of supplies there before. Inside, we ascended a few ramps, and sure enough, a cluster of risen roamed the upper levels. but there was a broken barricade on the second floor. If triggered correctly, a loud noise there might lure the infected down to our level. Once we were deep inside, I slipped away and jammed the vehicle's horn with a piece of metal, creating a constant blare. That drew the attention of every risen in the structure. Within moments, they converged on the second floor. Gwen, Raina, Kevin, and Marcus realized too late what was happening. They tried to shut off the horn, but the infected poured in. I stood on a higher floor, watching as the chaos engulfed them. Kevin tried to shoot his way out. Raina screamed orders. Gwen cursed my name. The last I saw of Marcus was him swinging a crowbar in wide arcs. They were overwhelmed. I turned away and walked out. I had no reason to wait around. That was the last time I attempted group travel. With them gone, I felt free again, though perhaps a bit more aware of my own capacity for planning and cruelty. I told myself it was justified. They would have turned on me eventually. Still, a small voice in my head wondered if I had crossed a line. But I shook it off. Lines never mattered to me. Now, I'm writing this in the 3rd year of the outbreak. Winter is giving way to spring once again. It's strange how the world keeps turning, even when civilization crumbles. The infected are still here. Humanity is scattered, living in fractured pockets. The old roads are broken, choked with rusted cars and debris. Yet somehow I'm still walking. I've made my way further west, past Indianapolis. The farmland stretches for miles, dotted with occasional barns and silos. Nature is reclaiming everything. Vines twisting over highways, grass sprouting through asphalt, trees growing in suburban yards. Sometimes I see deer moving across fields, unafraid. If I recall my therapy sessions, they once asked me about empathy for animals. I never felt any special bond. But out here, I admire their simplicity. Yesterday, I found a hidden orchard behind a decrepit farmhouse. The trees looked half wild but still bore fruit. I picked as many apples as I could carry, stored them in my pack. There's a pond nearby, fed by a small stream. The water tastes fresh if I boil it. A few infected drift along the property, but they're easy to avoid. It's peaceful. In a way, I've started to realize I prefer this silence to the old world's artificial noise. Sometimes, I catch myself thinking about the old days, not with regret, but with a detached curiosity, like I'm studying a story that happened to someone else. I recall being in that therapy circle at Cedar Heights, forced to discuss my feelings. There was a time we did an activity where we had to write letters to those who hurt us. I never shared mine. If I did, it would have said something like, "I'm not broken. You are." I wonder if my mother survived somewhere. If so, I doubt she's looking for me. I'm certainly not looking for her. When I picture her face, I see only a stranger. The concept of family feels foreign now, just like the idea of safe neighborhoods and smiling neighbors. The world has changed, and I can't deny I've changed with it. In many ways, it feels right. A place where the strong thrive, where pretense is stripped away. People show their true nature now. Some cling to compassion, hoping to rebuild. Others succumb to cruelty. I'm somewhere in between, observing, existing, without guilt or shame. As spring blossoms across the Midwest, I find myself setting up a makeshift camp in what used to be a national park. I won't say which one exactly. It feels like I should keep something for myself. The infected are there too, wandering across empty campsites, stumbling between trees. They're slower on uneven ground. For me, it's easy to skirt around them. In the evenings, I climb a rocky outcrop that overlooks a valley. The sky is wide and open, more stars than I ever saw near the cities. Sometimes, small groups of survivors pass in the distance, trudging along a trail or pushing an old cart. I watch them from above, unseen. They have hope in their eyes or desperation or something else I can't name. My first instinct is always to hide, to remain apart. But lately, I feel a flicker of curiosity, as if I'm considering whether to approach and say hello. Is that a sign of growth? Or just another ploy to see if they're worth anything to me? I recall a passage from an old biology book about apex predators, how they shape the ecosystem around them, removing the weak. It's a natural process, something older than humanity. Out here, I've become a predator of sorts, but the difference is, I can choose. I'm not mindless like the infected. I'm not bound by a moral code like some survivors. That makes me wonder if I'm closer to a monster than the risen ever were. There's a rumor I picked up a few weeks back. People say a research facility in Colorado is searching for a cure. Some ex-government scientists holed up in a fortified lab, working around the clock. Part of me wants to find them. Part of me wonders if it's even possible to cure what this world has become. A cure might raise the dead back to a semblance of life, but it won't fix the cruelty that erupted among the living. If these scientists succeed, maybe the infected threat will fade. But what then? Will humanity go back to pretending everything is fine? I'm not sure I want that. This new reality, harsh as it is, seems more honest. People can't hide who they are behind polite smiles for very long. The apocalypse put everyone's heart on display. Some rose to the occasion, saving lives, forming communities. Others, like Gwen and Raina, saw an opportunity to dominate. And me? I've floated between these extremes, guided only by my own need to survive and a complete lack of attachment to others. In this third year, I stumbled upon a small settlement near an abandoned train station in the middle of the plains. They've reinforced the station's perimeter with scrap metal and old fences. Maybe 15 or 20 survivors live there. A solar panel array from a local power project still works, so they have limited electricity, enough to run lights for a few hours each night and pump water from a nearby well. They call themselves the station keepers. By day, they tend small crops. By night, they man the walls, keeping watch for infected or raiders. It's a peaceful place, almost too peaceful. The moment I showed up, they asked if I was hungry. One of them offered me some roasted vegetables, watery but warm. I said yes, surprising myself. I actually sat around a small fire in the station yard, listening to them chat about hopeful things, how they want to expand the walls, maybe fix up the train tracks to connect with other enclaves. I caught my reflection in a broken window that night. I looked worn, with sharper angles in my face than I remember. My hair had grown uneven. My eyes had that distant stare I'd seen in other people who'd lost everything. But inside, I felt calm. Something about this station's sense of quiet optimism made me pause. I found myself lingering day after day, even though I had enough supplies to move on. I even helped them with a small chore. A group of infected had stumbled into the farmland on the station's east side. I joined 3 others as we crept through the tall grass, systematically taking out the risen with knives and clubs, avoiding loud gunshots. They were impressed with my efficiency. I discovered that fighting alongside them felt strangely satisfying, not because I cared about them exactly, but because I felt included. It was a novel sensation. Yet I can't shake the feeling that if things go wrong, if they turn on me, or if they become too demanding, I'll revert to my usual pattern. I'll strike first, slip away, leave them to face the consequences. That's who I am, right? That's who I've always been. A part of me wonders if I'm tired of that existence. If maybe, just maybe, I want something more stable in this fractured world. Or maybe I'm just fooling myself, like I did in therapy, pretending to be on the mend while secretly plotting my own path. Tonight, I'm sitting by the fire in the station yard, listening to the low crackle of burning wood. There's a faint glow in the sky, maybe a distant town on fire, or a lightning storm over the horizon. One of the station keepers, a middle-aged teacher named Lindsay, is trying to organize a small school for the kids who ended up here. She asked me if I knew anything about survival skills that might be taught. I shrugged, uncertain. Should I teach them to trust no one, to strike first? That hardly seems appropriate even in this world. Lindsay's colleague, an older man named Garrett, is repairing a generator. He claims he used to be a volunteer firefighter in Kentucky before the collapse. He asked me about my life before everything changed. I told him I worked in an electronics store and had some therapy sessions for stress. That was the polite version. He didn't pry further. He said he's seen so many folks with scars, physical and mental, that nothing surprises him anymore. I have to admit, there's a strange comfort in hearing people talk about normal things. Generator maintenance, teaching kids, growing vegetables. They share jokes about pop culture references, recall old movie lines. For a moment, it's as if the risen are just a side note. Then, at the perimeter fence, a pair of them bang against the metal, snarling silently. Someone dispatches them with a spear. The conversation resumes. I glance around the circle. Lindsay, Garrett, a couple named Maria and Felix, a younger boy named Rico. They trade stories of near misses with the infected, their hopes that one day they'll connect with that rumored settlement out in Colorado, or maybe a Red Cross station that never fell. Part of me wants to laugh at their optimism. Another part of me sits quietly, unsure of what to say. It's been nearly a month since I arrived at the train station. I help with chores, stand guard at night, accompany scavenging runs. They appreciate my skill. I haven't betrayed them, and they haven't betrayed me. It's the longest I've coexisted with a group since the outbreak. In the evenings, we gather around the fire, sometimes sharing the day's small triumphs. A successful garden harvest, a minor repair made to the fences. One night, Lindsay asked me if I ever missed my old life. Her question lingered in the air. I told her I missed certain things, like the convenience of flipping a switch for light or turning a tap for clean water. But as for people, I had no real connections before the outbreak. She gave me a thoughtful look, as if trying to understand. I think she realized I wasn't just another survivor haunted by the loss of loved ones. I was haunted by a life that never gave me much to love in the first place. She said she lost a son in the early days, back when the infected first overran the hospitals. Her eyes flickered, and she gripped the edge of her jacket. She didn't cry or talk about heartbreak. Instead, she stared at me, searching for a reaction. When I offered none, she simply nodded and turned away. It was as if she was testing me, wondering if there was any empathy in me at all. Maybe she found her answer that night. I notice how the station keepers keep a respectful distance sometimes, as if they sense something unsettling in me. But they don't cast me out. Maybe they'd rather have a dangerous ally than a potential threat on the outside. Or maybe they see the subtle ways I help defend this place. I'm not sure. At times, I walk along the old tracks behind the station, letting my mind wander. The farmland extends to the horizon, dotted with clusters of infected like lost cattle. I could leave, vanish into that endless landscape, do what I've always done. Roam, survive, kill when needed. But something keeps me here. Maybe I'm curious to see how long a place of fragile hope can last. Or maybe a part of me is drawn to the stability they offer. A few days ago, a large horde of risen stumbled onto the train station from the north. An old cargo train had derailed on the tracks, and the noise of its final metallic screech must have drawn them in droves. We spotted them early enough to prepare. The station keepers had a plan. Lead the infected into a bottleneck, created by some half-collapsed freight cars, then pick them off with bows, crossbows, or silent takedowns, saving precious ammunition. I found myself leading a small team with Lindsay and Felix, sneaking along the outer fence. The infected advanced in a clumsy wave, arms outstretched. The group inside the station banged on metal drums to lure them closer. Then, from behind, we moved in and targeted the stragglers with knives and spears. At one point, Lindsay got separated. She veered off behind a cargo container, with two infected closing in. Felix shouted her name. I saw an opening to help, but for a split second I hesitated. Would I revert to my old habit, let her face the consequence and slip away, or would I step in? Something made me act. I rushed forward, silent and quick, driving my knife into the infected closest to Lindsay. She stumbled back, tripping over debris. I dispatched the second one, pivoting to slash at its neck. The two risen went down, unmoving. Lindsay caught her balance. We locked eyes. She didn't thank me out loud, but there was relief in her expression. We regrouped with Felix, finishing off the remaining stragglers. In the aftermath, we lost only 2 station members, a victory by apocalypse standards. The survivors gathered in a solemn circle, the air thick with the smell of decay. Some buried the fallen outside the fence. Others collected salvageable gear from the defeated infected. I slipped away from the crowd, unsure how to process my own actions. Why had I stepped in to save Lindsay? Was it just a tactical decision, or was something else stirring in me? A week has passed since that battle. The station is calm again, though the perimeter is littered with the remains of the risen. I've helped dispose of them, piling bodies far from camp so as not to attract more. We rigged makeshift barricades where the fence was damaged. Everyone seems exhausted, but they smile softly when they pass each other, a shared sense of relief and camaraderie. Lindsay approached me last evening quietly. She said, "I know this place isn't perfect, but it's ours. You've been here a while now. Do you plan to stay?" I didn't know how to respond. She gently said, "You don't have to answer yet. Just think about it." So I have. There's a part of me that yearns for the lonely road, the simple clarity of fending for myself without the complications of people. But the world has changed irrevocably, and maybe I have too. In a way, I've grown used to the station's routine, the sense of purpose that comes with defending a place. I even find a strange satisfaction in seeing the orchard we planted start to bloom, or the expansion to the fence line that might allow for more farmland. At night, I replay my memories, from the therapy sessions in Newark to the glimpses of my father's absence, my mother's distance. I recall the grin of that Cedar Heights doctor, congratulating me on my progress. I wonder if they'd be surprised to see me now, 3 years into a world where no moral code remains, and yet somehow I'm still alive. Would they label me cured for defending a settlement? Hardly. But maybe they'd see the faint spark that made me save Lindsay from the infected. I don't know where I'll be in another year. The infected remain a constant threat. The night air still carries the echoes of distant moans and shifting footsteps. Other survivors, with agendas of their own, might try to take this station by force. And I'm still me, capable of violence at a moment's notice, unburdened by regrets. But I can't deny that something has shifted. Maybe it's the faint warmth I feel when I see the station's children practicing with wooden spears, determined to protect their home, or the shared relief when we haul in a good batch of crops, or the small nod Lindsay gives me whenever our paths cross, a silent gratitude I never asked for. I stand on the ramparts at twilight, peering across the empty plains. The horizon glows with the last streak of orange. Far off, the silhouettes of the infected shuffle in disorganized clusters. They haven't come close again since the horde. Nearby, Felix is on watch, scanning with binoculars. Maria calls up saying dinner is ready in the main yard. A normal scene, yet so surreal in a world that's ended. Am I becoming attached? Or am I just waiting for a moment to prove that trust is a liability? Each day, I teeter on that edge. Part of me wants to embrace the station's fragile sense of belonging. Part of me wants to sabotage it and run, as I've always done. For now, I remain here, balancing between 2 possibilities. After years of seeing the absolute worst in humanity, and in myself, I'm oddly curious about whether I can find a place in this new, unrecognizable landscape. The infected are constant, but they're not the real monsters. We are. Or at least, we can be. So if you're reading this, if you found these words somehow, heed my warning. Do not go outside if you think the world is the same. The old world is gone. The infected roam the roads. But the real danger is what people can become when laws vanish and survival becomes everything. If you can find a place of honesty, maybe it's worth defending. If you can't, keep moving. As for me, I remain at the station, unsure whether I'm still the psychopath I once was, or if there's a seed of something else growing in me. Something like empathy, or at least the desire for human connection. Time will tell if that seed flourishes, or if it withers under the endless onslaught of the apocalypse. Until then, I keep a knife at my side and one ear open for trouble, because out here, you never know what, or who, might be lurking in the dark. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.